Now, this very pithy blurb that I've come up with is good as blurbs go, but if we actually started going through this, it would take us, well, a doctoral dissertation, a few years, and certainly more than the time that we have here to unravel the mess that Pakistan finds itself in. So in order to clarify things, I would like to tell you that what framework I'm operating in. I work for a human rights organization, and it is my job essentially to look at Pakistan and the world through the prism of international human rights standards and the framework of international law. As a result, there are certain basic assumptions I would make, analytical assumptions, if you will, about what is necessary in Pakistan. And I feel it only appropriate to spell those out, because actually if we disagree on those, which would be fine, we would have a fundamental disagreement, and that is principally that it is my view that in order for the business of the state and the business of society to be transacted with any level of success in Pakistan, this has to be done in a constitutional framework where there is a rights-respecting rule of law and there is civilian rule. Now, all of this sounds very, very nice, but in Pakistan, the reality is very complicated, and often it doesn't quite work out as one would expect it to.
What would you like to do?
Oops. What would you like to do?
I was live tweeting the events.
So that's basically the framework that we are working in now. The question, of course, is that there are powers in the world that subscribe to these ideas ostensibly that I'm espousing, such as the United States, which will tell you that it is a force for democracy and it is a force for good, and it seeks to inculcate and export, if you will, these values that I speak of. The question, of course, is that if the US has had this close and meaningful relationship with Pakistan for much of its history, why has it failed to actually transfer any of these values that it claims to espouse in the country? And I think that is a very, very fundamental question. And I think that actually that lies at the root of much of the anti-Americanism that we see in Pakistan that I mentioned. And it's, in a sense, it's fairly simple. It is that the American relationship with Pakistan has essentially been a security-driven relationship. It has never been a relationship of shared values. It has never been even a relationship of shared interests. It has been a relationship of strategic calculation of what the United States can extract at various points in time from the Pakistani state, and what whoever has controlled the Pakistani state, which has usually been the military, can extract in return. In that sense, it has been a mutually exploitative relationship. It has also been a relationship that has not factored in Pakistani public opinion or Pakistani society. To me, it's very clear. It is, if in the 80s the security agenda was fighting the Soviets, which may have been perfectly worthwhile, but it was transacted with little regard for the cost it would exact on the social fabric of Pakistan. If post 9/11 the agenda was a consequent de-Islamization, if you will, again, it has been transacted with little regard for what the social cost of it is to Pakistani society. What, of course, this has led to is a widespread perception that the US acts not just out of self-interest, because all countries in the world act out of self-interest, but that the US acts at the cost of Pakistani society and its prevailing mores, values, whatever those values and aspirations may be at particular points in history, and whatever, and it deals with unrepresentative power blocks, oligarchies, the military usually, that is ruling Pakistan in order to achieve this. Now, in my last sentence, there was an assumption that, okay, so if the problem is that the US has this alliance with the military and the military is not in power anymore, the problem is solved, which is what we heard in 2007 and 2008. And certainly what someone like me also advocates and stands by to date. But the issue is not the problem is resolved. The issue is civilian rule in Pakistan, or the beginnings of civilian rule in Pakistan, will not change either the parameters of the US relationship with Pakistan, which remains a security relationship, or the Pakistani reality overnight. The problem with the United States is that it has a 4-year November election cycle view of history, which really creates problems for those of us who take the long view, which is most of the world. And in that sense, much of US foreign policy making, decision making, tends to be short term, because it is responding to its own political dynamic. Now, the US will tell you, okay, in 2007 you wanted General Musharraf to cede power, you wanted the army to go back, you wanted these political parties to be allowed the space to contest elections and govern. You got all of that. Why do you still hate us? What's the problem? And the answer to that simply is that it takes a very long time. Institution building. The Pakistani military tells us often, not entirely unreasonably, that it is the only coherent, cogent, functional institution in Pakistan. Perhaps it is. I'm not questioning that. To me, the more interesting question is why it is. And perhaps it is the only one because it has not allowed other institutions to prosper, to have the space to develop themselves. And therein lies the problem with the business of democracy. The Americans do not simply, in a nutshell, have the patience. They have a 2014 deadline, which is about an honorable exit from Afghanistan, and the expectation is that all of Pakistani society, its military, its political parties, which in that sense are even more unreliable partners because, well, they're actually responding to currents in society and cannot, can only override those up to a point, certainly to a much lesser degree than military governments at the height of their power can. And there is this great disenchantment with Pakistan as a consequence. It is not delivering. Now, that's the American end of it. But there is more to this, and the other end to this is what happens in Pakistan. And it is my view, and when we open this up for Q&A, I'm happy to be corrected if you think otherwise, that there is a fundamental confusion that runs through the Pakistani state and through Pakistani society about what is actually the core interest of this country. Is the core interest of Pakistan an alliance with the West led by the United States? If it is, on what terms is that alliance to be crafted? And if it isn't, what are the viable alternatives? What would an alternative Pakistan look like? The problem, of course, is that this transition to democracy that we are seeing right now has, in addition to everything else, muddied the discourse in Pakistan on these issues. So you have the very interesting example of the issue of the NATO supply line, and actually I put to you that it is the imperative need of the Pakistani military to have those supply lines restored. Their well-being, their revenues, their security strategic relationship with the US all hinges on that. And you have a political opinion, widespread political opinion, that actually tells you that no, we don't want to do this, and we don't want to do this because we hate the Americans. Now, as I've often argued, well, if you hate them and you really want to hasten their departure from this place, well, let's open the supply lines so that they can, those trucks can go back and forth, and everybody can leave, and then the region can go back to its traditional unsavory ways. But it doesn't happen, and the problem here is that the hypocrisy of discourse, the inability to actually face up to what Pakistan needs itself, is also something that runs through the Pakistani state, military and civilian. The military requires this alliance with the US, but it is not willing to take the heat for it. It is not willing to actually turn around and say, we want these supply lines restored. It is in our interest. They are not willing to even say this in a DCC, Defense Committee of the Cabinet, meeting. The government is preoccupied with issues of survival and of completing its term in office, and is therefore there is for those of you who are Pakistani, an expression in Pakistan called time pass, and that is basically that you get from day to day to day to day, and hope that the passage of time will just deal with the issue. It's something that certainly in Pakistan all of us subscribe to in varying degrees, and I think that the Pakistani military does that as well. So this issue of the supply lines actually goes down to the lack of coherence both by the military itself, by the civilian politicians, and together that I've been talking about. But there are other signifiers of this. For example, the case of Shakil Afridi, the man who ostensibly ran a fake polio vaccination program and tried to find Osama bin Laden and may have contributed to his capture. Shakil Afridi is a very interesting character. Hackles in Pakistan rise when you mention Shakil Afridi. Shakil Afridi is viewed as a traitor. And the question is, why? Why is he a traitor? Is he a traitor because he was providing information to an enemy power? If he was, in fact, and then you are arguing that the US is your enemy, then, well, it has to be taken to its logical conclusion. Because if you are arguing that the US is your enemy, then you're arguing that Osama bin Laden was a Pakistani asset. And if you are arguing that he was a Pakistani asset, then, well, that says certain things, and everybody will factor that into their calculus of how to deal with Pakistan. Shakir Afridi has been convicted, interestingly. He has been convicted not of espionage, not for sedition, not for treason. He has been convicted for having links with militant groups, which is a Kafkaesque kind of twist to this whole bizarre tale, because there are any number of actors in Pakistan who have links to militant groups, many of them associated with the state, and they are not sentenced to at all, or convicted, or held accountable for those links. There are terrorists, as declared by law, who are not sentenced. I do not know of one sentence awarded to anyone by an anti-terrorist court for a 33-year prison term. But the man who was instrumental in the discovery of Osama bin Laden has been sentenced, and I think that this actually indicates the confusion that the Pakistani state suffers from. Now, what is the impact of all of this on Pakistani society itself? And I think that I would like to briefly actually speak about that, because that really is my area of expertise. There are many, some of them in this room, that I know who are greater experts at the international relations part of this relationship. But what I know is that within Pakistan, you have a situation where really the lesson has been that one has to be careful for what one asks for, and certainly someone like me was strident in asking for an independent media and a free judiciary. Now, don't get me wrong, I still am very happy that there is an independent media and a free judiciary, because there is really nothing as the cacophony of voices that is the Pakistani media, many of them spewing hate, to me, even now, is preferable to the charming, sedate tones of a dictator in uniform. That is the kind of uniformity that actually creates a pressure cooker situation, which ultimately backfires on Pakistan in spectacular fashion. All of Pakistani history shows us that you have great periods of ostensibly calm and development during the reign of military dictators. You had the decade of development during Ayub Khan, 13 years of military rule from 58 to 71, which led to a set of circumstances that led to the fall of Dhaka and the creation of Bangladesh. You had 11 years of Ziaul Haq, which really was a period many people will tell you of great calm and prosperity and middle-class growth in Pakistan. And it led to what we have seen in terms of the creation of the jihadist enterprise. You had the 8 years of General Musharraf, and yes, I'm certainly willing to accept that compared to Ziaul Haq, he was Bambi. But that's really not the point. The point is that you again have a situation where the contradictions that were papered over or that were suppressed under General Musharraf are coming home to roost. One of them is the business of anti-Americanism, the business of what happens to Pakistan, what it means to be a Pakistani, and what your place in the world is as a Pakistani. General Musharraf claimed to be dealing with the militant groups that were operating in Pakistan. He claimed that he was going to actually just move into the Western security camp, strategic camp, lock, stock and barrel. There can be two opinions about whether this is a good thing or a bad thing. What there can't be two opinions about is that he didn't do it. He didn't do it, and he in fact used many of these religious actors to garner political support from, and thereby provided them a high level of social space. The only time in Pakistan's history where there has been a government of religious parties, a sustained government of religious parties, I correct myself because there was one briefly in the 70s, has been under Musharraf when the MMA alliance ruled the province now known as Khyber Pakhtunkhwa. Of course, there was no attempt, and there still has not been any meaningful attempt, to clamp down on the Lashkar-e-Taiba because it is viewed as intrinsic and to Pakistani security interests with reference to India and Kashmir. The problem with this is this. There can be really, and it will work for the US as a rhetorical device now that they're leaving, but there can't be good Taliban and bad Taliban. There can't be good militants and bad militants. There can't be the selective use of religious militancy where it suits you and an end to religious militancy where it doesn't suit you. And the reason why it can't be is not because it is bad, which I think it is, but let's forget about it. Let's not infuse this with morality. It's not because it's bad. It's because society is organic. And when you create space for actors that are armed, that are extremist, and you allow them space in society, they will seek an expansion of that space and a broadening of their worldview, and will seek to sell what they espouse. And that really is the problem with this, and that is what is happening in Pakistan. Militancy and extremism today is not about Fatah or KP or Balochistan. It is a fault line that runs through Pakistan, through all of society, through all major urban centers, through rural Punjab, into Sindh, down to Karachi, from Khyber to Karachi, as they are fond of saying in Pakistan. Militancy and extremism is a part of life. What does this militancy and extremism does? Why does it bother people like me? Why does it bother young urban Pakistanis? It bothers young urban Pakistanis whose aspirations are very different to perhaps generations gone by, because it limits our space to be at one with the world with any level of dignity. It's very simple. As a Pakistani today, you are a pariah. You are viewed with suspicion, your options are limited, and you find that the world views you with animosity, and with a great deal of trepidation. That is how you are viewed outside the world. Within the country, you do not have avenues of expression. You are, if you are being something as harmless as a singer, well, you can be a singer, and all of us, by the way, excel at this. Pakistan has diversity, it has Coke Studio, it has this. Of course it does. But all of those people are also very heavily circumscribed and cannot operate with any level of security or in an environment which is an enabling environment. And this is a very, very serious problem. It is quite apart from the economic problems that I'm talking about. I'm talking about aspirational problems. There is a problem of the curtailment of aspiration, and when you curtail aspiration, you kill hope. And when you kill hope, people become nihilistic and destructive. And none of this is rocket science. It's fairly conventional wisdom or non-wisdom. So that's kind of the situation that Pakistanis find themselves in. I can tell you about the culture of abuse and impunity in Pakistan. That's normally actually what I talk about. I can tell you about human rights abuses in Balochistan. I can tell you that the state is complicit in those abuses. I can tell you that the state argues that there is Indian involvement in Balochistan. I have often said there may well be. It stands to reason. These are mutually adversarial states, and they will seek to exploit each other's Achilles' heels, and so it stands to reason that that would happen. The government of Pakistan, the Pakistani state, the military, the FC, to date, has been unable to put one solid piece of evidence in the public domain. And therein lies the problem. Is this a function of the fact that the security agencies are just simply incompetent? If that is the case, well, they need to engage perhaps in a shift of priorities from a move away from abusing their own people and to actually combating what is the destabilizing factors in Pakistan. The destabilizing factor is not me. The destabilizing factor is not even poor Asma Jahangir, whatever you think of her, who yesterday, on the 4th of June, for the first time, and I would emphasize this to you, Asma Jahangir has been a human rights activist, a high-profile human rights activist for 30 years in Pakistan. She has been a consistent critic of the military and the intelligence agencies for those 30 years. It was on the 4th of June 2012 where, for the first time, she actually accused the intelligence agencies of plotting to kill her. She has never made such an accusation before. So, I view the lady as a woman of stature and integrity. Perhaps some of you don't. But consider what has happened, what has changed. If you look at another case that I was particularly involved with, which was the case of the journalist Sareen Shahzad, journalists are killed in Pakistan. We are all aware of that. The state kills them. Other militant groups kill them. It's not just a state thing. The state has a particularly problematic relationship with many journalists, and a systemic, a relationship of systemic coercion, but other groups also kill them. The problem with Sareen Shahzad's killing, what outraged people was this. The man was picked up in broad daylight from the middle of the red zone in Islamabad. He was heading from his home to the Dunya News TV studios. There are 14 security checkposts between his home and the studios. if the ISI was not responsible for picking him up, for disappearing this, either the ISI disappeared this man in his car at 5 p.m. through those 14 security checkposts, or a man and a car disappeared through 14 security checkposts in Islamabad, and the ISI is very, very incompetent. And the same holds true for the Osama bin Laden issue, whichever way you might want to look at it. They were not harboring him. He was in the shadow of the PMA. Okay, he was in the shadow of the PMA. They didn't know that. The CIA came and spied on him for another year. They didn't know that. Well, there's a problem with that, and the problem with that is that when you are unable to deal with existential security issues, which really is your job, and you are in turn threatening human rights activists, are threatening journalists, are killing political opponents, there is a problem with that. Finally, I just want to, I think I've gone on for too long, and
finish off what you're saying.
And I would like to make one final point, and that is about what Pakistan, urban Pakistan, young Pakistan is and isn't. I mean, I was described as a young person. I'm fairly old within the Pakistani scheme of things. You have to be, if you're young in Pakistan, you're 18 years old, which is what most of the country is. But I have realized one thing, and this began to dawn on me in 2007, and it is now a fact of life. It particularly dawned on me a few months ago when I was at the Frontline Club having this conversation, perhaps slightly adversarial conversation with Anatole Levin, who has written a great book and is a very fine scholar, but whom I disagree with on many things. And he'd been to the Karachi Literature Festival, and he expected, I think, and what he expected would have happened 20 years earlier. He expected that here was a person advocating in the middle of all this Pakistan hatred that as a Pakistani you perceive in the Western world, as an honest broker, someone trying to explain the Pakistani military to people who were out of sympathy with it. And when he arrived in Pakistan and he tried to share this view with the young people who were there, he got a very, very mixed reception, to put it mildly. And the reason for that is that there is disenchantment with the Pakistani political parties. Yes, they are miserable at governance, they are incompetent, they have serious issues. I can tell you of lots of wonderful things also that have happened in the last 5 years, but let's accept that this is all true. There is in urban Pakistan today no buy-in for a return to military rule. And that is the bottom line. That is what is different in the city, including in what were traditionally the strongholds of the military. In northern Punjab, in the highly hyper-urban corridor that runs along the Grand Trunk Road between Rawalpindi and Lahore, in the cities of Rawalpindi where GHQ is and Lahore, no more are people willing to countenance a return to military rule. And I put to you that that is actually Pakistan's saving grace. The space and the desire for civilian rule, it turns out, has not come to Pakistan through the good offices of the Americans. It has come to Pakistan through a level of middle-class mobilization and urban mobilization. That urban mobilization also has ugly manifestations. A lot of it is going to be right-wing, but it will be democratic. And to me, therefore, with all its faults and failings, with a hyperactive, hyper-activist judiciary that frequently engages in judicial overreach an undue infringement into the due constitutional domain of the executive and the legislature, with a media that is hate-mongering, that often spews venom and lies, and is actually an agent of instability in many ways. Despite all of this, Pakistan today is a more pluralistic society, and it yearns for a rights-respecting compact. Now, whether this happens or not depends on those who wield power in Pakistan, and that is the politicians, but far more so than the politicians, it is the military. Pakistan is essentially a Praetorian state that is going through its umpteenth very precarious transition to democracy. And this transition to democracy, let us be clear, will only succeed if the military decides to act differently. If the military decides tomorrow that it is not going to act differently, as it has in the past, it can destroy all of this. In the process, what happens each time is that the destruction of society is much greater. And there is only so much brutalization, there is only so much abuse that a society can take before it loses all semblance of being one. And Pakistan is close.
Thank you very much. Well, I'm going to invite some questions now, and I'm sure there are lots and lots after that most stimulating talk. Who'd like to kick off? Yes.
Thanks for an excellent presentation. I've heard you speak before as well, so I'm not surprised at how articulately you described the situation in Pakistan. You talked about the hypocrisy of discourse in Pakistan, and you also talked about the values that one would associate with the US. Do you think one of the problems is that there is almost naive for the rest of us to assume that there is just one set of values that the US espouses? Is it not two sets of values? So you have a set of values that you preach to the world, but there's also selective use, as you said, of militants. So there is such a thing as good militants and bad militants, or dictatorship won't be tolerated in your own backyard, but it is almost a necessary evil in certain developing countries. Do you think that recognizing that would allow us to understand the US better, regardless of whether one considers the US a friend or an enemy?
I mean, I think that there is this tendency, of in terms of the Pakistani view of the US, which is like kind of Stockholm syndrome, meets a dependency crisis kind of thing. And really, at the end of the day, when I look at the US, I look at the civil rights struggle in the US itself, which is something remarkable. I work with lots of American civil libertarians, and let me tell you that there are no civil libertarians in the world like Americans, who have transformed and struggled to transform that society and wrested power and for marginalized groups within that society. So to me, what actually a society's aspirational values are is how it's treating its own citizens. And in that sense, I think that the US does a pretty good job. Now, in terms of Pakistan, this is always, what I found very silly about Memogate, this joke that occurred in Pakistan, this little, quasi-judicial attempt at a push, at a coup. It really shouldn't be dignified as anything other than that. The fundamental lunacy in that whole thing was the idea that the US could somehow effect a change in the power relationships within Pakistan by decree. That Admiral Mullen would pick up the phone, call General Kiani and say, well, as of tomorrow, Hussain Haqqani is going to control the nuclear arsenal, General. And he would say, yes sir, 3 bags full, sir, and that's what was going to happen. It doesn't happen like that. At the best of times, what the US, when it suits the US, can do is give Pakistani political parties a seat at the table with the Pakistani military so that they can effect a power-sharing compromise. After that, it's up to Pakistanis. It's up to Pakistanis to create a democracy for themselves or not, or what kind of democracy they're going to create for themselves. And I think that they are actually, on their way. I think it's fine. I don't think that. I think the US is a marginal player in terms of the day-to-day politics of Pakistan. It's a hate magnet and so on, and that will also end soon enough.
Another question. Yes.
I just wanted to really, there were one or two things which are main differences with Pakistan and America. One is that Baitullah Masood, people in Pakistan, they are convinced, it is not a question that they feel, they are convinced that he was sent by America to do everything against Pakistan. He was in the jail, and 2 years he was there, he was sent with all the money, with all the equipment, and within 2 months he was able to raise an army. The first attack was on Chinese engineers, and after that so many things have happened for destroying. Number two was really that this one, the CIA, this American, they had this in Iraq, black waters, which was really, it is, everyone knows that whatever army could do, they will entrust to them, and they killed so many people, they did all the bad things. That black water contract was given in Pakistan to their ex-army, American army. And they took a lot of houses in Islamabad, Karachi, Multan, Peshawar, and they were creating, first of all, their own agents, and they were also creating law and order situation. So these are the two major things which are really hurting Pakistan, and that is the relationship which is going on.
Sir, in a nutshell, I really can't subscribe to the view that Baitullah Masood is an American agent. Great. I just can't agree with that. And also, I would like to point out to you, for the record, that when the Mumbai attacks happened, it was actually, if I recall correctly, the DGISPR himself who described Baitullah Masood as a brother with whom there was a temporary misunderstanding. The temporary misunderstanding being that he may just have killed Benazir Bhutto and blown up Pakistani civilians. But the point is that no. So I don't agree with that. Now, as far as Blackwater or XE or whatever it's called these days is concerned, I understand that there is a lot of paranoia about the presence of these characters in Pakistan. A lot of it stems from their conduct in Iraq, which was a country under US occupation. It's a markedly different situation that we are dealing with, where the principal onus for security lay with the US. I would say to you again, and this has not changed since 2008, the US military and intelligence relationship is with the Pakistani military. Civilian actors are marginal actors in that relationship. So, if in fact there is the presence of Blackwater, or whose job it is is it to see that these people are there and to decide that this is a problem? It is the intelligence agencies that are meant to be in charge of this. So if they are, again, either they do not want to deal with this issue, or they are failing to deal with this issue. It's not a question of, the US is not, certainly in my 10 years of dealing with the US, I realize that the US government is this hydra-headed beast which speaks at cross purposes all the time. The Pentagon says something, the State Department says something else, the NSC says something else. You can't even get a coherent policy line out of them. So this idea that it is this omniscient, Darth Vader that is actually choreographing everything in Pakistan, I find it very difficult to believe in light of the evidence that's available.
Ali, first of all, I don't want to embarrass you, but I think that you do outstanding work at great personal risk to yourself. And every time I ask you to appear on the BBC, I worry about, what the risk that I might be exposing you to. But what I really want to ask you is about more about your analysis of Pakistani society. Particularly when Salman Taseer was murdered. Particularly about the reaction to that, because what I've been asked again and again since then is, the reaction, the sort of, the celebration of his killer, particularly on the part of the lawyers. What is it that is going on when people whose, work and vocation is the law can celebrate an extrajudicial killing of that kind?
Well, the short answer to that is that there are lots of very unpleasant people whose work and vocation is the law in Pakistan. And to put this in context, this is the lawyers' movement in 2007 was the function of a very particular political circumstance and moment. From extreme right to centre left, which is about as far as you can go in Pakistan, everybody came together on a one-point agenda, which was that they really wished to see the last of General Musharraf. The second the transfer of power occurred, and really actually from the second he resigned the presidency, there was actually from the second the transfer of power occurred and the PPP came into power, that coalition began collapsing. The seeds of that coalition collapsing were already present before the election took place, because actually before the election took place, there were two political parties, the PMLN and the PPP. The PMLN gave a commitment in its election manifesto that it would restore Chief Justice Iftikhar Chaudhry to office and the judges, and the PPP did not. And the party that did not actually won the election. It was a very, very complicated thing. The rhetoric around it was convoluted, and that coalition started collapsing. So basically what happens by 2009 is, with the restoration of the Chief Justice, what happens is that the lawyers' movement has ceased to exist, and all those lawyers are back to being what they were, which is either Jamaat-e-Islami lawyers, or now Tehreek-e-Insaf lawyers, or PPP lawyers, or PMLN lawyers, or lawyers with further extremist views. And so the lawyers who celebrated when Salman Taseer died were not all the lawyers of the lawyers' movement. They were the right wing of the lawyers' movement who were actually being sadly true to their values. It was just that it was a very, very shocking moment, because even by Pakistani standards, to rejoice in someone's death quite as openly as occurred in the aftermath of Salman Taseer's death, because actually it exposed the fault line in Pakistani society. There were people who were distraught, and there were people who felt inspired to come out on the streets and celebrate. And that actually shows you that there are deep divisions within Pakistani society.
But I don't think, if I may just follow up that question and answer, that quite answers the question as how can lawyers who should be dedicated to the rule of law have justified, however extreme they may be, an extrajudicial killing, a murder?
Well, because these are, to contextualize matters, these are lawyers who uphold the law in, as I said earlier, a Praetorian state, where the Constitution has been a plaything, where these ideas of law and legality are actually about, it is a grievance redress mechanism in the crudest form of the word, the law. The majesty of the law is something that is, even today, if you look at the conduct of the Supreme Court, which owes its existence and its power to the majesty of the Constitution and the rule of law, you will find, certainly I have found, that the court often acts at variance with the fundamental rights provisions of the Constitution, which is what I think would be the opposite would be the hallmark of any rights-respecting judiciary. So, like the political culture, the legal culture also comprises large numbers of people who pay lip service to these values and use them as a means to an end.
Don't you think that we are focusing too much on American hate and American as a Pakistan society? But I think there are a lot of other countries who have a lot of influence in Pakistan, and that brings the religious and fundamental extremism. And we tend, in hate of America, we tend to forget how much influence other countries have, like Saudis, like Middle East. Every political person who has some problem tends to run to Saudis, and the whole set of extremism we are forgetting, even in the lawyers and Salman Taseer case, because it's very easy about the power and American hate, but we are forgetting that there are lots of other influence from other countries, especially the Saudis, with madrasa culture, the extremism, the sectarian violence, and everything else, which we haven't touched in this talk.
Just for those at the back who may not have heard that, what's being suggested is that too much blame is being heaped on the Americans and that there are other malign outside influences. Do you want to comment on that?
Oh, well, yes, I agree with you. I cunningly chose to concentrate on the anti-Americanism because I didn't want to be booed by the Pakistani society.
But that's the problem, because we do sweep every problem at the American carpet, I'm afraid.
Yes. I mean, it's certainly the enablers of Jihad Inc. have been the Saudis and Saudi Arabia, and that is just the dirty secret that nobody is willing to face up to.
Right. Yes.
Let me just take this point a bit further. Is that I think this is disgraceful and very shameful for us to just discuss the celebration of death of Salman Taseer in a very civilized manner, calmly, because I think we should be condemned, not just condemned. What sort of law we have in judiciary in Pakistan, which is supposed to be independent now, and I think we should be emphasizing on that. And also we easily start blaming India, America for all our evils and so all what is happening, when the problem lies within our own home. Now, I will also take a little bit further your point about the incompetency of the security forces. IS or any other agencies, I don't think it's incompetency. I think it's connived, collusion with all the other extremists who cannot be controlled, as you said. Now the thing is that how come these groups, military, religious, political, how come they with such impunity they can go and blow up, explode bombs in Islamabad, Rawalpindi, Lahore, wherever they feel like it. I think the problem lies within. You have so many, Taliban. They are not American trained, because obviously ISI is very clearly okay under national security. They can be forgiven, not disclosing their operations and so on. But often they cover these extremist groups, whether it's Savage Injury and the other group, they are totally banned, and yet they are openly roaming the streets.
Right.
And please, if you can.
Yeah, so I actually am in agreement with much of what you are saying. I can phrase it in different ways. I can say to you that the Pakistani military state perpetrates a hoax on its people, and those contradictions are collapsing in on themselves. That's actually how I see it. I think that the problem simply is, first to go back to Salman Taseer, the thing is, of course, there is, I mean, certainly someone like me felt a lot of horror and outrage, and I persist in feeling sickened by what happened. But the fact of the matter is that the forces that killed him are forces that are the state has actually parceled out or leased out a lot of its security functions to. So what I'm trying to say to you is that if extremist groups are strong in Pakistan today, it is because the extremist groups have been armed and used by the Pakistani state. When I say the state, I'm basically saying the military, for its own ends. And what I was saying to you even in my principal talk was that you can't pick and choose about this. There is, and I find certainly with the Pakistani military establishment, there is, I think that the bubble has burst somewhat, but there is a fundamental, perhaps it comes from being in an institution and being schooled in a particular worldview for 30, 40 years of your adult life. I wouldn't know, but I mean, I have found, and I mean, like all Pakistanis, I have relatives in the military. I have no sense of the military being the other, but I do know that I find, even with people whom I find absolutely charming and lovely, their worldview bewildering when I talk to them, because they will tell you that everything's fine. I mean, until 5 years ago, it was everything's fine. We've got it under control. You don't understand. Yeah. And the point is that that's just not true. And if you try and say, well, this is the data, this is what's happening on the ground, here it is, you get a completely different spin on it. So the thing is that these militant groups are a function of that. Who's armed these non-state actors in Pakistan? What are we doing even now in Swat as a means of imposing order and authority? Where you say, oh, we have to arm tribal lashkars because justice has to be local. And the state is abrogating its responsibility. It's arming the tribal lashkar. It will achieve the purpose in the short term, but it takes you back to the original point, which is that everybody who is the TTP today was also a state-backed tribal lashkar not very long ago. And this is a vicious cycle. Yeah, I agree with you. I have all of that outrage, but I sort of, expend it in front of TV cameras, or when I go to the NDU, I will. Certainly, yeah.
My name is Javed Khan, and I'm very patriotic Pakistani, and I would like to know how you see the future of human rights after Americans have left the region. Thank you.
Well, I mean, this is it's a complicated question, but I mean,
that's why I put it short.
Yeah, it's still complicated. Some things will get better, hopefully, and some things will get worse. But human rights, at the end of the day, or the desire to have human rights, or the desire to uphold human rights, is not a function of the Americans in Pakistan. That's the one thing I disagree with. I've often said this. I mean, I work for an international organization, and my position has been that all the values I espouse as a human rights activist are values given to me by my family and in my home. These are not ideas I came to university, to England to acquire, or acquired through training sessions in international humanitarian law, courtesy Human Rights Watch. So I think that there is plenty within society, within Pakistani society. It really depends on what those who wield power in the state decide to do. That's very, very important. I mean, let us not forget that there is a fact about the South Asian state, Pakistan, India, Bangladesh, Nepal, Sri Lanka, which is that these are structurally authoritarian states. The great gift that the British have given us, I'm fond of saying, is Section 144. Across the Commonwealth you have this. Well, those were colonial states, and that's how these states run. They beat their people into submission. It's not just Pakistan. In India, the northeast, it happens in the northeast, it happens in Kashmir. In Bangladesh, they could find nobody else, so they're doing it in the Chittagong hill tracts. In Nepal, you had that whole. In Sri Lanka, there's been 20,000 Tamils were killed in cold blood. Now the point is that this is a post-colonial problem, if you will, and this has to change because this is untenable now, and it is people certainly within Pakistan, which a lack, in many ways, a lack of or doubt in the capacity of the state is a very liberating thing and an agent for positive change. And in Pakistan, many people have that doubt. In India, people tend to buy into a lot of what the state tells them.
There are many other people to ask many questions. That's why I will not argue with you.
I can take two more questions.
Thank you. Mr. Ali, many thanks for giving a very comprehensive description of what is happening in Pakistan and where it is going. And that has raised many questions in my mind, and in the interest of time, I will confine myself to a few one-liners. You mentioned international standards of human rights. Can you please tell me where they are being practiced? Number two, military influence. You talked a lot about military influence in Pakistan. I know no way or form I will just define military influence in Pakistan, but it happens everywhere. Obama ordered the closing of Guantanamo Bay. It hasn't been closed by him, by the military. Dr. Shakil Afridi. I'm not supporting those people who protested against Osama's killing, but has Osama's killing.
That would be a
I didn't say Osama. Don't you think that this has caused a lot of damage to that particular part, people of that particular part who already had reservations about polio vaccination?
No, we've got three questions there.
One more, please. One more, please. Just one. It's very, very important.
Yes.
It's a very important one, please. Do you think the Prime Minister of Pakistan is serving democracy? Do you know why?
Four big questions there.
We're here for another 3 hours now.
Okay. Well, sir, in terms of international human rights standards, is a expanding and evolving body of law, and for people like me, it is our job to propagate the adoption and adherence to that law. I'm certainly not suggesting that we are anywhere close. I'd be out of a job if we were. But that's the idea. So, yes, there are places, there are areas of the world that are more in tune with international human rights standards. There are places that are less. Europe, certainly, the European Union is one of the better places in terms of its adherence to international human rights standards. That doesn't mean that human rights abuses don't occur. I mean, there will be abuse as long as there are people. I think on that we are all agreed. The issue is, can you have legal structures and mechanisms that can minimize abuse and that can ensure accountability when those take place? So that's that. Now, in terms of military influence being a fact of life everywhere, I'm not advocating at all that Pakistan, declare itself a pacifist state and engage in unilateral abolition of its military. That is certainly not what I'm suggesting. Yes, militaries have influence. They are stakeholders in any state, critical stakeholders in any state. My objection is to the military exceeding its constitutional ambit and mandate. That's all. As a human rights activist or as a Pakistani, all my expectation of the Pakistani military is that it will adhere to the Pakistani constitution, that it will understand that it is not its job to rule Pakistan, and it is not eventually, which it has still not learned, its job to decide the contours and parameters of national security. That is the job of a elected political government in consultation and factoring in the views, aspirations and expertise of its military. That's all I'm saying. I mean, I don't think it's a particularly controversial thing.
There's nothing more wrong, if I can say more wrong, than disobeying the orders of the Commander-in-Chief. That is what was done in the case of the Ranamati.
Yeah, so I'm not justifying what happened in the US. What I'm saying, and I do not think that there was an overt violation of a direct order in the US. That is not how that played out. There are disagreements, of course, and militaries often actually get their way because they are the people on the ground and they are the people who have relevant expertise, and one can't take that away from them. They serve a purpose. Now, in terms of, I agree with you that the polio vaccination program has received a setback, that Save the Children has suffered as a result of it. Save the Children is an NGO I hold in high regard, and I'm very sorry that has happened. And yes, it has. But let us not overplay the damage to the polio vaccination program and to the paranoia. The great big problem in all of this was that Osama bin Laden was found. What is all this umbrage that people are taking about other things, in my view, are various rhetorical devices to cover up the fact that the circle that you can't square, which is that here was this man a kilometer down from the Pakistan Military Academy. Either he was there and they knew it, or he was there and they didn't know it, and it's damning either way. And that's actually what this is all about. And now, in terms of the Prime Minister of Pakistan, again, this is a big and complicated question, but the Prime Minister is the head of the cabinet, and the government of Pakistan's performance has been mixed, certainly. If you are asking me about thing, but I will also say to you that there has been a record of really in the defense of this process, that there has been a record of exceptional legislation. Parliament has actually done what Parliament is supposed to do, which is legislate and legislate progressively to empower and protect people. So in that, I do not fault, and the credit to that goes not just to the government, but to all of Parliament. And I think that certainly 10 years from now, when we look at the legislative record of this Parliament, I don't think there has been a period in Pakistan's history where it has been quite as impressive. I mean, not that Parliament has ever been around for very long. Having said that, there are of course all these issues of misgovernance and so on. Now, in terms of, if you are asking me specifically about the fact that the Prime Minister is convicted, I think that is a very, very complicated area and not one that lends itself to an easy or quick answer, which is what I'm trying to do right now. So I will leave that. But it's not, there is a context.
Would you give some credit to Pakistan military?
Sorry, we have a little bit of order here. The gentleman over there, yes.
With regard to democracy, I'll tell you, sir, Winston Churchill said, democracy is a terrible system, but that is the best we have. It is a good possibility, if not certainty, that whatever you buy in the boom time, it will be worth 30 to 50% less when the boom is over. Think. Now, what type of democracy exists in Pakistan where part of it, justice is not part of it? Now, about the justice, I'll tell you about, you mentioned about Asma Jahangiri, a woman of integrity, of human rights. She came here, she gave an interview in which she mentioned about these persecutions of ethnic minorities and other things. And in that she mentioned also, what about Ahmadis in Pakistan? What about those students of Ahmadis, medical students and all? Leah she did mention, and she also mentioned about that she proposed that whoever, people are taken on false reports to government servants and convicted and punished. So she proposed, or human rights are predicted, that whoever makes a false complaint to the government servants or to the police, and and if it is proved, they should be punished. The mullah's reaction, she has stated, I've got the interview with me, that she says, this was a terrible thing, their reaction was that if this bill is passed, we will come on the streets and we will strike against it. That means saying against the justice. That was the question.
Sir, I understand what you're saying, and I mean certainly minorities in Pakistan suffer terrible legal discrimination and social persecution, and it is so dire a situation that we could do a whole session just on that. And yes, that is a terrible situation. Now, but to answer your fundamental question, I will judge Pakistani democracy when it's been around for 20 years. When there are 4 election cycles and there has been 2 decades of civilian rule, then I will be able to make a judgment on Pakistani democracy. So far, my military has not allowed me the opportunity to do this. I certainly hope that this time it does. And when that happens, we can reconvene in 20 years and we can do a meaningful analysis. At the moment, we have a 4-year-old government, 4.5-year-old government, which came in after 8 years, 9 years of military rule, and well, it's not done particularly well in certain areas. It's done really badly in other areas. It's done a few good things. None of it means anything. It's a systemic institutional thing. It takes time.
Now, I said just 2 questions, but there was a gentleman at the back who had his hand up and was most keen to ask a question. Well, it's gone. Now you, yes.
Actually, coming back to the point about lawyers, I think we have certainly have different standards back home, because I just read about the Chief Justice's son who was involved in a major corruption case, and the Chief Justice himself is going to hear the case.
He is hearing.
I mean, normally, the Chief Justice would have recused himself, but he hasn't done so. And that was one point. The other was a question about the Shakil Afidi thing. I'm not clear, but I thought the judgment was passed by a local tribal jirga sort of court, so it wasn't an official state government sort of thing. But so how could they accuse him of having contact with militants? They are all militants themselves.
Well, if you want, that's the sort of small light and shadows number that we do in Pakistan. The reason why Shakil Afidi has been convicted by a tribal court, and post facto we discovered that actually he was not convicted for what we thought he was convicted for at all, which I insist is the most wonderful thing that came out of all of this. But the thing is, that he was convicted by a tribal court, because had he been convicted for sedition or treason under the Pakistani constitution, only the death penalty applies. He did not get the death penalty, and the FCR, being the remarkable law that it is, actually the political agent can just let him go when the time is right, all other things being equal. Now, so that's actually the rationale of it, but this is what I'm trying to say. These are the aspects of where governance meets national security that are a hoax that need to change. Things have to be for real. What you have is a set of is public opinion that is very confused and very angry because it gets contradictory, mutually irreconcilable signals and worldviews from the state.
Sorry,
Right.
sorry, I just have a quick question.
Yes.
You mentioned about Ms. Asma Jahangir making a public statement about her life being threatened. What does that say, do you think, about the government of today, that she's been doing this for 30 years and she hasn't felt the need to do this even in the era of Zia or even in the era of Musharraf, for example, and today we have a democratic setup and apparently a less involved military or ISI than previous. What does that say about the government, do you think, that she's felt the need to say this today? And
I think it says about the government what we all know about the government, that the government is very weak and does not have any control over the ISI or the military security apparatus. No, there are things that it has control over, but not this.
Well, we've had a fascinating, absolutely fascinating talk and questions and answers. I think, regrettably, we're going to have to bring this to a close. Thank you very much indeed. Your talk had a heading, Free Fall or Resurgence, Pakistan Free Fall or Resurgence. The message that I get from all of this is that it's still up for grabs. It could be one or the other. Speaking personally, and as an outsider in all of this, we in the West, we in this country, are very conscious of the problems that Pakistan suffers from. But when I see people like Ali, I think that there's a great deal of hope, I must say. Thank you to SOAS Pakistan Society. And please don't forget these. We have lots of excellent talks like this. So here's your chance to join. Okay, thank you all.
Thank you.